Welcome to KGXT, Gen X Talks podcast, live from Central California.
Making plans with the boys. I'm gonna hit the town. Yeah, I'm gonna make some noise. I'll push past the pain and my wounded pride. I'm gonna live it up. Yeah, stay out all night. But sure, I've had some better times. And I can't count all the tears I've cried. And maybe down my last time. Yeah, but the blues took me just fine.
Need to get done.
Hey, welcome to another interview. Yeah, Gen X Talks podcast, broadcasting. Well, we're not broadcasting. We're recording live from the KGXT studios, 200 feet below occupied California in the Central Valley. I promised you guys we'd have some more interviews, and we do. And they're always better when they're in person. I get the Zoom call thing. The Zoom call thing doesn't quite get it done, does it? It's always better when someone's here because then they're right in your face. And if they say something offensive to hurt my feelings and make me cry, I can jump across the table and wrestle them to the ground and make them eat sardines for half an hour. And don't think I won't do it. I got a pack of sardines in my back pocket ready to go. Hey, so I want to let's just go. Let's just start. If you're ready and you're here, get your beer, get your drink, close the drapes, put the dog out, and relax. You got about an hour. You know, if you're not doing anything else, this is where you're supposed to be anyway. All right, so let me just jump right in. You made it. You drove. You had to leave early, man, because it's not like exactly 4 in the afternoon. But you guess is Calder Keene. He's a Coast Guard guy. That's like the least of the things he does, but that's one of the main reasons we met. We've met once before. We had lunch a while back. You drove down then too, but it was a much easier drive. You have to get up at 4 in the morning. So tell us a little bit about yourself. First of all, you're in the Coast Guard. Give us your rank and a little bit about what you do there.
So I'm in the Coast Guard. I am currently an E6, a Petty Officer First Class, as a Maritime Enforcement Specialist. Been in the Coast Guard for 13 years. Had the opportunity to travel the United States and different parts of the world with the Coast Guard. In between when I'm not working for the Coast Guard, I am a police officer for the Department of Army in beautiful Monterey.
Okay, hold on. Hold on. Now, we talked a bit before, but you're catching me off guard here. Your job description is something military in the Coast Guard anyway? I thought you were just military civilian out that dealt with the military.
I do both. I
so
play
you
both
actually have a job title that includes military police type of work.
Yes.
Wow, I did not know that. See, something new every day. All right, so you're in the Coast Guard now. How'd you get there? Give me a little background on where were you born, raised, and how'd you get to where you are? So
I grew up in a small town outside of Modesto called Oakdale. Real small town, big country feeling. Back in my early 20s, so I was trying to get hired on into law enforcement with multiple sheriff's office, city PDs, CHP, and I would make the hiring list, but just wouldn't get picked up for whatever reason. So I wanted to become more desirable in my resume. Ended up talking to some friends. We discovered the Coast Guard, and it went on from there. 2010 is when I enlisted. I wanted to go active duty, but at that time, the economy, everything was really bad.
So that wasn't your first choice. You weren't trying to go in the Coast Guard. You were trying to get into some sort of law enforcement, and that became just an avenue to get where you wanted to go.
Absolutely.
Wow, far out, man. Who in their right mind would have ever thought, hey, law enforcement. Oh, join the Coast Guard. We'll get you right in. You know, that wouldn't have crossed my mind. Before, you know, I got to tell you, I'm a big fan of the Kevin Costner Coast Guard movie. So I believe after Kevin Costner was in that and Ashton Kutcher, I believe you're familiar with that movie.
Oh, we are.
Okay, so I know everything about the Coast Guard, just so you know. I've watched the movie 3 times now, so I believe I'm all caught up. I know all there is to know about the Coast Guard. I saw the movie. It's a lot of helicopter and swimming, so I get that. How much of it is actually that, though? How much of it is actually where you guys are out rescuing people?
So we do a lot of rescuing. The movie, obviously, Hollywood got involved. So you're not going to be swinging from a cable 60 feet above the ocean. In real world, it's probably going to be 10, 15 feet because when you hit that water, it's like concrete.
Wow.
But every day, the Coast Guard is out doing life-saving boardings. We are the most probably productive military branch, all of them. And that's not to take away from the Marines or the
No,
Army.
it's a different thing, especially during peacetime. You
Yes.
guys are active even during peacetime. You're fulfilling all the roles all the time.
On the average day in the Coast Guard, 365 days a year, we seize around 1.2 thousand pounds of cocaine.
You're kidding me. You guys really are the shore patrol. I mean, that's true.
Yeah.
You guys really are. I mean, I'm sure the Navy has Navy boats and stuff near their ports, near their bases and stuff, but not down the rest of California. I don't see Navy boats patrolling the coast of California.
So the other branches, in my experience, they typically won't admit it, but they all love the Coast Guard because we are so unique. Being that we're under the Department of Homeland Security, the Navy can call us. We can fly a Coast Guard flag off of one of their boats, and now they can go out and do Coast Guard law enforcement missions
Wait a minute.
with us.
The Coast Guard is under Homeland Security?
Yes. That's why we are so much smaller. We have a different budget. We have a different mission. That's why we're able to operate the way that we do.
I had no idea. I thought you guys were like, okay, and I'm just a dumb mechanic in the middle of the desert. Let's get that out of the way. But I thought that you guys were either your own entity and just had a really small portion of the military budget, or you were actually part of the Navy. That's what I would have assumed. You guys were both in the water.
So, being the Coast Guard, we are so unique. So we can be part of the Navy. In a time of war, the Coast Guard can be transferred to the Department of Navy. It's happened before. Last time, I believe, was World War II. If you're in the Coast Guard, you are now part of the Navy.
Navy, welcome
Yep,
aboard.
exactly. You're still wearing your Coast Guard uniform. You're still doing your Coast Guard missions, but you're doing it in conjunction with the Navy and all of their assets.
So, there's a question when you're talking about patrolling. You guys look at things, you're seizing drugs and things coming into the country up and down the coast. Are there any? Do you guys have live weapons on your cutters and things? On your boats? Do you guys have? Are you authorized to use them? Can you?
Yes. So everything obviously comes down into the realm of law enforcement, whether it meets the requirements of the use of force. The Commandant of the Coast Guard gives us the guiding principles, which short version of it means we're not going to use force if we can carry out our duties without using that force.
Right, but you do have what? Okay, let me ask you this: a boat, whatever. Okay, what size boats do you have that patrol? What are they? Are they considered a cutter?
Yes. So we have cutters. We have 378 footers all the way down to 25-foot boats.
Okay, and how many of them have mounted weapons? Not just something you carry, but do any of them?
They all do.
They all do.
So the 25-footers can have 240 Bravo machine guns on them on the bow, and then they can also have machine guns on the port and starboard side.
Really? So that's not just a Hollywood thing. That's a real gig.
And we have anything going all the way up from 50 cal guns to the 240s. You get on some of the bigger ships, they have even bigger. I believe it's 25 millimeter.
Yeah. A friend of mine this was years ago. A friend of mine, this is my Coast Guard nostalgia story for me, and it's kind of stupid, but a friend of mine years ago, we were having a conversation, and at that time, his story was years old when he was a young man in the Coast Guard. I didn't know you guys towed vessels in. And he was talking about, he goes, we were on this, one of the biggest boats the Coast Guard had. And he says, I think he said he was in the North Atlantic area. And he goes, the water out there, when the North Atlantic becomes unforgiving, he said, he goes, we were on our way to rescue this boat. He goes, I knew we were going to die. I knew we weren't going to make it to that boat. He says, we literally were plunging under the water, this whole boat, the biggest boat the Coast Guard had, and it was getting sideways to where the water, you were almost in the water, nose was in the water. He goes, there's no way we're going to make it. Then we get out there by some miracle, and they're like, well, just throw a line onto that boat, and we'll tow it back. He goes, are you kidding? He goes, we barely made it here. We can't go back at no speed, but you guys did it. It was amazing. He said, he goes, the challenge turned out to be, it wasn't so much of us, of our big ship going under. He said we were pretty good on that. We knew what we could get away with, and it turns out I was the only one nervous because everybody else had done this before. But he said the challenge was getting those lines hooked up.
Yep.
To another craft when everybody's bobbing and weaving in 60-foot waves, getting it connected and not close enough that it would run into us from behind. And they did it. The Coast Guard towed that thing all the way in. When you listen to his story, you're like, how did anybody live through that? But it's just what you guys do. Now, that they don't show too much in Hollywood.
No, they don't. And I think that's the beautiful thing with the Coast Guard is we go out and do these missions every day. That's where the Army, Marines, Navy, when they're here in port, they're training. Then they go do their mission and they execute it flawlessly.
Right.
We train and then we go do it every single day. So you might have a guy who doesn't have the same level of experience, but that's where the E4s and E5s and the coxswains, we're going to mentor him. We're teaching him how to handle that line, how to do it safely, so he doesn't hurt himself or somebody else.
Well, he was talking about he was one of the younger guys on the ship at the time on the boat, and he was. He goes, I followed orders, but he goes, it was just impressive. Everybody knew what had to be done. And he goes, I just knew. He goes, he couldn't tell me enough times. He knew he wasn't going to live through that mission. But I don't remember, and I'm sure it's happened, but I don't ever remember. It's not like a headline you hear all the time, Coast Guard ship goes down. In fact, in my lifetime, I've got 56 laps around the sun. I've never heard of a Coast Guard ship going out to save somebody and dying in the mission. You guys are pretty tough about that stuff. Well-trained and good equipment. Which brings
very
me
good.
What's that?
I said very good equipment.
There comes sunny point number 2. I had a Marine Corps staff sergeant on one of our interviews, and I was questioning him about the equipment. Now he's a helicopter mechanic, and he goes, well, the stuff I work on is state of the art. He goes, in the Marine Corps and the Navy, these helicopters I've specialized in. They are. He goes, there's $10 million components I hold in my hands. They're completely top notch. He says, however, the rest of the Marine Corps is a lot of hand-me-downs from the Army and the Navy. And when they get the new stuff, we get the old stuff. Still good, but not the cutting edge. What's that like let's just take your helicopters. Because we always are familiar. When you see a Coast Guard movie, you see a Coast Guard in a TV show, it's always the helicopter. How modern, how cool, and how bulletproof are those things?
So, being that I don't work on the air side of the Coast Guard, I can't say with certainty, but they're all fairly new. I know our helicopters are essentially a Blackhawk, just a different color scheme with different equipment.
Really?
But I know our unit in San Francisco, we recently just overhauled one of the engines. But I would say on average, they're maybe 15, 20 years old.
You got to put it in requisition for some rockets, man. If it's in Apache, I've seen some bolt-on. Go to Amazon. They got to have some.
I'm sure it's on Amazon.
Would you like to upgrade your Coast Guard helicopter to full combat ready for this kit right here? And if you have Amazon Prime, we can get it to you in one day. Have all your stuff there. Well, that's God. The Coast Guard, man. There's so much. Coast Guard is always. It's anytime I've talked to people in the military, and I got military friends in all branches all over the world, and it's always the running joke that you kick around the Coast Guard. But when it comes down to it, when you sit with my friends, especially, I got a friend who's a Pentagon liaison, and we were growing up, and he was in the Army. He transferred to the Air Force because he needed to get into a certain type of intel. And, of course, the running joke was the Coast Guard and the Air Force the whole time. But he was very candid about that at times. He goes, we were on missions and doing stuff in the military, and the Coast Guard got to us first. Even when we're doing an exercise and something goes wrong in training, he says the Coast Guard is always on, especially near Navy bases. The Coast Guard has an interactive presence where they know where you are, where they are. And if something happens, Coast Guard's, it's almost like you guys have a brotherhood that once the jokes all get set aside when there's a need. When
it's time to work, its mission comes first. I mean, and even in the Coast Guard, we call the air crew guys rotor heads, and there's always that friendly banter back and forth.
Right.
But when there's a mission, we need to rescue somebody, we need to go do a boarding. Mission comes first, and then we can go back to bantering.
I heard a story one time, and I keep reiterating the fact that the running joke during the day is, the Coast Guard's not, they tugboats and plastic toys and shit. I remember a story. It was a friend of mine who's my age, and of course he's out of the Marine Corps now. And I forget where he was. I want to say he was down near Pendleton, and it was their day off, and they were, in town doing stuff, and it was getting towards evening, and he was in a bar, and, there's kind of a military bar, but there was civilian people around there. And some people, some redneck hillbillies from inland started picking a fight, and it happened to be with some Coast Guard guys. And my friend told me, he goes, the Coast Guard dudes were just trying to have a few beers and go home. And they started a ruckus. And he says, because these hillbillies, these like 5 or 6 or 9 of them were picking on 2 Coast Guard guys. And he had said, he goes, Coast Guard guys weren't doing shit, but these rednecks thought nobody's going to stand up for the Coast Guard, making fun of them. As soon as the first punch got thrown, there was 65 people, and it was Marines, it was Navy personnel, and they were all over them, because when it comes to blows like that, or it comes, like you said, to the job, to the mission, you set all the bantering aside.
Yep.
You guys have, there's a brotherhood in there. They're like, dude, you're not going to do this. That was a great story for me to hear, and I was maybe 25. I thought there was no way that could be a true story, and it was. My friend was there.
And that's one of the things I've grown to love the most about the military is we will say the meanest things to each other's face. We will tell each other to F off, mom jokes, you name it.
Yeah.
We will say it to each other. But behind the scenes, you get a phone call as a reference. Oh, yeah, he's a great guy. Squared away. He has the discipline.
Yeah.
We'll say nice things behind each other's backs, but to our faces, it's game on.
But you know what? I don't care about that. As long as the job gets done, as long as you guys all pull together when America needs you, who gives a shit what happens? That's your way. Let it be your way.
Absolutely.
Who are we to say? Run. Now let me ask you another question. This has popped in my head. When you talk about different branches of the military, and we've already discussed your part of Homeland Security, but in every branch of the military, there is an elite unit. That takes training. It's specialized. Navy, they're the SEALs, and in Army is Green Beret. I get that. And is there anything like that in the Coast Guard? Is there anybody that sets aside, or is it just the divers like they talk about in Hollywood? They romanticize that, but is that real? There
absolutely is. We do have some very high speed units, especially in the maritime enforcement realm. It's kind of split into two. So being the Coast Guard, we don't do combat. So we have two sides of the Coast Guard. We have what's commonly referred to as the Blue Guard, which is our life-saving, our standard law enforcement. There you have your TACLET units.
Right.
Those are the guys that are going out and doing the high-risk boardings where, hey, we know there's weapons on board. We know there's some type of elevated threat on this boat. Great group of guys, highly trained. On the other side of the Coast Guard, we have what's called the Green Guard, which is where I spent the first 12 years of my Coast Guard career with a port security unit. Of the port security units, we are the only units in the Coast Guard that will deploy anywhere in the world. Within 96 hours of getting that phone call, we will be where we need to be, boots on the ground, self-sustained for 30 days.
You're kidding. You can now, okay, hold on. Now, if you can be anywhere in the world in 96 hours for 30 days, how are you self-sustaining somewhere that far away? There's got to be some supply chain that takes care of it. Now, does the Navy do that for you guys? Or?
No. So the way the port security units are set up is we have everything in console containers, from our tents, cots, MREs, all the equipment that we need.
You take it with you. You're ready to go.
It all gets loaded on a C-5 aircraft with the Air Force, and wherever we're going, it gets offloaded.
You're self-sustained then for 30 days.
Our boats get trailered straight into the aircraft with the truck hooked to them. They get chained down. We fly where we need to go.
They drop the boat and you're there.
Yep.
No. I never in a million years would have guessed it. That's okay. I dig that. That's called that. Okay. You know what? I'm proud to be an American at this moment. Because that's one more thing that's like, holy shit, I didn't know we could do that. You can deploy a complete tactical unit of the Coast Guard anywhere in the world, and you're self-sustained for 30 days no matter what.
Yep.
Wow.
Now, where the port security units are going to go, we're going to be in the rear with the gear. So we're not going to be the first boots on the ground establishing, but we're going to go and we will take control of an entire port.
Well, and you said you're not combat. So, let's just say that something happened in some situation where the Marines come in and seize a city or do something, control something, and there's a port. You guys would come in after. I'm not saying you're.
Yep.
I wouldn't assume you guys would come in and take over, but yet logistically to do your job in a foreign port, you're there second, but you're ready to go. Is that what it sounds like?
Yeah, and we're going to take control of that port. Nobody's going to come in and out without us knowing it. We're going to set up shoreside security. We're going to have our boats out in the water patrolling that port, making sure all the way down to escorting approved vessels in. And if somebody tries to come in that's not allowed to, they're going to do what they need to do to keep them out.
I've never in my life heard this aspect of the Coast Guard ever. I'm an old guy. I've never heard that.
We are the Coast Guard is the greatest secret in the military.
Unbelievable. That's great. I dig that, man. I'm glad you see GCT. This is why the interview process, things unfold.
Yep.
You and I did not talk about this beforehand. This is just stuff that's unfolding as we go. All right. So, all right, the Coast Guard's pretty badass. I know everybody kicks it around like that, but I get where you guys are at. So you go into this, you go through all this training, you learn all this stuff. We bring you up to speed. The Coast Guard gets you at the point where you're at. But remember, the whole reason you went down this road was for a law enforcement aspect. All right. So now you get in the Coast Guard, you get to actually train and learn the law enforcement side. What is your first law enforcement duty? I'm assuming it's first in the Coast Guard. Is that kind of like a military police, or is it different?
It is different. So being that we're under Homeland Security, we are the only military branch that actually has the powers to arrest anybody.
Now, that's twice you said a military branch, but you said you're part of Homeland Security. Mm-hmm. So
there's
is it correct to say it both ways?
It is. So
Okay.
there's two laws. Both are federal laws, 14 U.S.C. 1 and 14 U.S.C. 2. One of them establishes the Coast Guard as a military branch, and 14 U.S.C. 2 is what gives us our law enforcement powers. Because of those two laws, that's why we can go out with the Navy and do Coast Guard missions.
Oh, I get it. Okay.
So it's written into the laws as to how we are able to operate.
That is completely unique.
It
That is extremely unique. All right, tell me, now we're going personal. We talked about the Coast Guard and painted with a broad brush. I got that. Very cool, by the way. But so give me your first encounter in law enforcement as a job. Now, you trained in the Coast Guard for it. I know you were talking about getting on board some civilian outfit, but was your first interaction as a civilian, part of a civilian contract, or did you do some military police type of stuff in the Coast Guard?
So I did my first actual law enforcement was in the Coast Guard. Again, I did my first 12 years at a port security unit in San Francisco, where we deployed to Guantanamo Bay for 9 months.
Really?
And we were there, part of keeping control of the port, working hand in hand with the Navy's Master at Arms, which is their version of MPs. We worked hand in hand with them, but then we also
never thought the Coast Guard would have been at Guantanamo Bay.
We actually have an air station there.
Really.
There's a big misconception when we read these news articles that say, "Oh, they're going to shut down Cuba. They're going to shut down Cuba."
Yeah.
They're never going to shut down the naval station. They may shut down the detention camps where the United States holds
prisoners
and stuff like that. That very well could get closed and changed.
But they're not going to give up Gitmo ever.
No, Gitmo, we are going to keep it forever. It's a point where we can refuel, resupply boats. If not, they have to come all the way back to Florida.
Because there's been a lot of presidents that have got sworn into office saying, I'm closing it down. And again, the military people that I know that are my age in the military, and some of them have quite a bit of rank, they're like, I say, well, I call them and say, well, is this going to true? Is it eventually? He goes, not a chance. They said the same thing as you, and we're not giving up our position there. So it's going to happen.
And I've never confirmed this, but I've always been told all the way down to, so the United States, we rent that land from Cuba.
Yeah.
Where we issue Cuba a check every month for it or every year, and because Cuba doesn't want us there, they don't cash it. So story's always been is Fidel Castro just has a desk full of U.S. checks sitting there waiting to be cashed.
He's like, we didn't cash your check. You can move out. I'm sure you're going to say, well, make us. You're gonna tell the boys and girls down at Gitmo to pack up and leave? I don't think so. You're not that tough.
But I think it's a really unique relationship we have there with Cuba, because I know like the captain of the base once a month, and it rotates. Sometimes they'll go to Cuba 1 month, and next month they'll be on our base, and they will. There's different agreements in place where if we have a natural disaster, they will open the gates in Cuba and let us go in there, use their hospitals, treat our people. Same thing on their side. If there's something.
Well, and let's face it, the relationship between the military and Cuba has changed in the last 15 years quite a bit.
Drastic.
It's no longer, it's not just a pinpoint on a map during the Cold War. It's quite different now. You know, we're not, it's a lot of things have changed, and for the better, I think. I think there's a lot more cooperation. I'm glad to hear that story you just told, because that's good to know that there's not just this. There's not in growing up in the Cold War, all I could think of was people pointing guns at each other across a fence line 24 hours a day.
Yep.
And it's not quite as hectic as that as it used to be. I think
No,
it's toned
it's not.
down some.
It is very much toned down, all the way to the story we always heard on our first trip there was the captain of the base. Allegedly, they don't have ice cream in Cuba, or they like the American ice cream.
Yeah.
So he would take ice cream from our galley to the meetings and bring back cigars.
Good.
I'm
Man,
like,
that's good.
Hey, if
It's
it works
true or not,
if it
yeah.
works, if it builds that relationship.
I dig that. All right, so let's go back to your law enforcement now. So your first actual, job where you get to now practice what you've been trained on in law enforcement. Where were you, and what did you do?
So when I first got into real law enforcement, and there's a difference. When I got hired on at my current police department, I thought I had an understanding of law enforcement because of the Coast Guard.
Right.
Coming into the civilian side of law enforcement was a game changer. That was May 1st of 2017 when my first day at Presidio Monterey Police Department, which is the Department of Army.
Right.
I thought I knew something about law enforcement. I didn't know anything, and I quickly got luckily I had very good sergeants and lieutenants to mentor me, but they quickly let me know.
You got an eye opener.
Yeah, you don't know what you think you know.
So give me some examples of things that not necessarily, I won't say they shocked you, you're a military guy, but that you went, whoa, it kind of opened your eyes a little wider. Give me some examples of some things that happened right off the bat that you weren't quite ready for.
So interviewing people, going to somebody's house and responding to a domestic violence call and having to interview somebody, a victim and a subject, and figure out was a crime committed, who committed it, and how was it committed.
And they say that all law enforcement that I've talked to all over the country says domestic violence, domestic abuse calls are the scariest ones, because the situation is still volatile and something's going to happen. That's one of the biggest, but percentage-wise, it's one of the biggest areas that officers get injured is on domestic calls.
It is by far the most volatile call we can ever go to.
Wow.
And it's just because you're going into somebody's always having the worst day of their life. But the things that people keep in their homes, a lot of people have guns.
Yeah.
There's knives in the kitchen.
Yep.
There's any blunt object in your living room could be a weapon to hit somebody.
Man, you'd
with.
have to be aware of your surroundings while you're doing your job every second you're there.
Absolutely.
Wow. So let me ask you this then, because you're a military guy. You've been trained in military law enforcement. So your first job is with a civilian police department. Is that right?
Yes, it is.
But it's operated in the Presidio on an army installation?
Yes. So it is the former Fort Ord base, which closed down in the early to mid 90s.
Right.
Fort Ord closed, but the Army still retained all the property.
Sure.
Now, over the years, the Army or the government has receded a lot of the land back to the cities, whether it be Marina, Seaside,
Yeah,
Monterey.
right.
But they still have an actual military base in Monterey, which is the Defense Language Institute, where they teach, I believe it's somewhere around 40 different languages to...
Oh, linguistic stuff. Yeah, cool.
And they teach anything from Russian, Farsi, Middle Eastern, Chinese, Arabic, French, Spanish, Russian.
So is that where that's okay? I'm just trying to remember. Dumb mechanic, middle of the desert. I use $3 words. Keep it simple. So when you get this job, and you're a military guy, law enforcement. Now you're on a military installation still, the remnants of the Presidio in Fort Ord. Are you part of a civilian law enforcement unit?
Yes.
You are.
Everybody who works at our agency is a civilian.
Then how do you get civilians to work at a military? I mean, I know that happens all the time with contractors and stuff, but I just wouldn't. Why wouldn't the military just have military police? Just get a bunch of Army guys and slap MP on their shoulders and tell them to go to work.
So that is something that the Army changes and they move around. So the Army still has the MPs, and you go out to Bragg, the Fort Drum, the big bases.
Right.
The MPs are still very much there, very much active. I believe once the Fort Ord closed, that's when the MPs were pulled away because now it's such a small entity that those assets can be used elsewhere.
Okay, but then when you go out to, let's say, a domestic call, are you being called out to any Joe Blow's house, or is that a military? If they say, hey, this is a military house with a soldier and his wife and they're in a dispute, okay, don't call the San Francisco PD or the Monterey PD, call you guys? Do you go out because it's a military person, or do you just go out to anybody's house for any reason at any time?
Anybody's house for any reason.
Really?
So if you're within our jurisdiction, so our powers of arrest are granted to us through the garrison commander, who's a colonel.
Okay.
At any time, he can take those powers away from us. But if it's in our jurisdiction, it is ours. And all the way down to we have relationships with the Monterey County emergency communications. So if somebody calls, because it's still 911 still works,
Right.
they will forward that call to our dispatch center.
All right. So again, stacking things up like pancakes in my head. You're a military guy, part of a military branch and Homeland Security. You train in law enforcement. You get a job on a military installation in Fort Ord as under the guise of a civilian police force. And you don't just go out for military calls. You go out to anyone in the jurisdiction.
When the base itself closed down in the early 90s, they never built a fence again. So now our housing is really unique. So we have 5 housing areas in the actual city of Seaside that anybody can live in. Military, civilian, retired DOD, anybody can. They're required to keep so many houses available for the military at any given time.
Right.
And then over in Monterey, we have another housing section that I believe the property is technically owned by the Navy.
But there's no fence anymore.
But there's no fence. So, and we can get a phone call. We might not know there's anybody there. There's a nexus to the military until we get there and start identifying people.
Wow. That's just, okay. So you go on every call. Mm-hmm. So you get there. Now let's go back to my question. What were some of the eye-opening things that you got to? So domestic, you come in and you're in the middle. Obviously, you don't have a lot of domestic calls on a cutter ship out in the Pacific when you're doing. So now you're here. You're getting these kind of calls. What was one of the toughest, scariest, eye-opening phone calls you had to respond to in the very beginning?
In the very beginning, I was
like
still
like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to go do this or not.
I was still in field training officer. My FTO at the time was still a green FTO, and it was actually the same DV that I was thinking about. It was all civilians, and I remember, and I'd probably been in the department for maybe 4 or 5 weeks.
Wow.
Still fresh out of the academy, like green. I got no idea what's going on.
Yeah.
And this particular call, there was about 3 young children in from ages 5 down, 2 females inside the house. The husband had been drinking. We walk in. There's fist holes through the bathroom door.
Wow.
And he'd actually fled before we got there, and one of the other sergeants came from a different route, because when we respond, we're coming from multiple angles, so if somebody flees, we can try to catch them.
Sure, yeah.
Caught him running down the road. I remember when they brought him back, he had blood all over his hands from the punching different things, and it was just the utter shock of it all. He might have even been one of them was in the military. I think the actual leaseholder was in the military, and these were guests who were temporarily staying there while they were in the process of moving.
Wow.
And just the other chaos inside that house was just...
Was there kids involved in that one?
No kids were hurt. They were just inside the house at the time in their bedrooms playing. And it's the weird things that you get hung up on. I remember that was the first time I had walked into another person's home that I wasn't invited in.
Right.
And it was a military, and I always had this impression in my mind based off of basic training that everybody in the military, we're clean, we make our beds, we do all these things, and you walk in and you just see chaos. Just dirty dishes in the sink. This is broken over here, and
Stuff
I was like,
that would not fly on base.
yeah, no, and you're like, what did I just walk into?
You are walking. You know, I wouldn't have thought of that, but now that I'm processing what you're saying, you are actually walking into someone else's home. Mm-hmm. This is where they sit and watch TV. This is where they put out their cigarettes in their own ashtray. This is their life, and you've just intruded on it. I guarantee you weren't welcome. You know, you was like you're forcibly going into someone else's life that you, like you just said. That's the key word you just said for me. You were uninvited. You were not invited to that situation. That's what an odd feeling to have being in there for the first time.
And you do kind of get immune to that feeling over time, all the way to, like, you do get some phone calls. Like, we also have the university right next to us. Well, the college kids used to come rent houses and live there while they were going to school. And it never fails at every college party. There's always somebody who's pre-law. You can't come into my house. Watch.
Yeah, you got to love those kids. It's a pre-law, and they're going to tell you how to do your job. Awesome. You ever been involved in a situation where there was a weapon?
Yes, that was actually my first use of force. Couldn't have gotten into it with a better beat partner. I was a sergeant at the time, and it was one of our officers, and we actually responded from Seaside to the base. It was a service member who was having some mental health issues.
Yeah.
And he had I think it was about a 6-inch fixed blade knife that he was cutting his hands with. And he was going over to all of his friends' rooms and hitting their windows, smearing blood on it. And we ended up finding him behind the gym on the track field. Luckily, when we both got out of the car, we saw him drop the knife. But when we were coming up to it, that was every call you go to where you have something like that, you get this gut feeling where, like, today might be the day I have to use deadly force. Right. And it's not a pleasant feeling. It's something, that's why we train for it. That's why we go to the ranges. It's why we do all this training, but it's such a scary thing. And if he hadn't dropped that knife, it could have gone very differently. Well,
you didn't say this is the first time you had to use deadly force. You said this is the first time use of force. So I'm guessing you still had to subdue the guy.
Yes, it ended up being a wrestling match on the ground. By the time we got him on the ground, he was still resisting the whole way. My partner got his legs wrapped up and twisted and was sitting on him. I got him in arm bars. We got him cuffed. And he had all the fight in the world. He kept going on when the firemen got there, because we wanted to get him medically checked out. Yeah. Say, hey, did we hurt him during this, so we can document it all. Right. All the way to, he was calling all of our fire guys who happened to be white. He was calling them the N word, and we're all like, that doesn't even make sense. Confused guy. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you this: what if you rolled up on a call to a higher ranking officer than you? What happens if you roll up and there's let's say, a dispute in a parking lot or a domestic dispute, but the guy outranks you? What do you do then?
I still conduct business as I would.
You have to.
And if he wants to push it, I'm more than happy to say, well, would you like to speak to the garrison commander? I have his number right here. Because
really, what if you roll up on a captain or something, it's a higher rank than you, he tells you to stand down, you're not going to arrest me, you're not going to discuss me if I'm having a problem with my wife and kids in my house. I don't care if the neighbors called you. Technically, I mean, if you're off base, does he still outrank you off base?
No. So because I'm a civilian, so his rank doesn't mean anything to me, and he can try to order me all he wants, but it's an unlawful order. And at the end of the day, I know, but the way the Army does it is it's pretty cool. So yes, the garrison commander is in charge of us, but our actual rank structure is at a completely different base installation.
So okay.
Nobody there has any rank on me. We're not in the same chain of command. The only person who can technically tell me anything to do is the garrison commander. And that's because it's his base,
right.
His dirt. He controls it.
Right. All right. So I get where you're going. Now, how long have you been doing in this particular job? Which I'm not going to describe it again, because as far as I'm concerned, being a civilian, that's complicated on how you got to where you're at in the layers of who's doing what and where, off base, on base, military, not military. I get that. How long have you been doing that particular job now?
I have been doing it 6 years, and I am still learning. And it's hard because not only do we enforce federal, we enforce state law, and we enforce the uniform or UCMJ, Uniform Military Code of Justice.
Right.
So as we're a police officer here in Bakersfield, they just have to worry about the state laws.
Right.
We have 3 sets of laws we've got to look
Wow.
up, and based on those circumstances, charge appropriately.
Apply them by situation.
Yes.
Wow, that's if you guys didn't have enough to worry about. You got to think about that stuff too. So if you're working as in a civilian capacity on law enforcement, when do you have to? You're still active in the Coast Guard, right?
Yep. So I do.
How do you do both jobs?
I do the Coast Guard Reserves. So 1 week a month, 2 weeks of active duty years, the minimum requirements per my contract with the Coast Guard.
Right.
I do more because I love it. There's federal laws that protect anybody who is a reservist in the military. My job is protected. They cannot fire me. They cannot discriminate against me. If I go on active duty orders for 6 months, they're required to hold my position.
Wow.
If my position if the company was to go, hey, we're actually doing away with this position, they have to give me a position of equal rank and equal pay when I return.
But see, the good part about it is I like hearing that because I know you. So I know you're not saying that out of arrogance. You're saying, I want to work. Mm-hmm. I want to work. I want a job. Don't cut me loose. Don't eliminate me. Give me something else. You're not asking to, send me home and give me the pay. Sorry. You're saying, give me a job, man. Let me keep working.
And in my 13 years, I've discovered it's typically not the companies that are the issue.
Yeah.
It's going to be individuals who they don't like the military or they don't like the headache that it comes with. Well, now I have to find a way to staff your position.
Right.
And I get that. There's challenges. But I would say 97% of the time, it's just an education part that, hey, this is actually, here's what the laws say. And once you explain it and teach them, they're like, oh, okay, I get it now. So most people, It's not a problem. And there's some really great companies out there that do take care of their service members. I know like some of the railroads, when we deployed the first time, it was either Union Pacific or BNSF.
Yeah.
They paid the guy his salary while he was deployed, plus the Coast Guard paid him. And they didn't bat an eye. I'm like, that's awesome.
That's taking care of your people.
Yeah, and that's to them. That's what it was. We're going to take care of you. You're doing something great for our country. We're going to make sure you're whole.
How many bases? Okay, how many branches of military? Not just people that live near you. Like, how many branches of the military are within your grasp of things you'd have to service?
So we have 5.
No.
So we have the Army.
What area in the world has 5 in the same area?
And that's where it sometimes gets fun and confusing. So we have the Army, we have the Navy, Air Force, Marines, and then we even have the Coast Guard on base. And then plus you have a small Coast Guard small boat station right there in Monterey that sometimes there's a little bit of bleed over because they live in our housing and they have nothing to do with us.
So which one, just in general, which one's the tougher ones to deal with? When you get a call out there, are you hoping you don't show up and it's a Marine? Are you hoping you don't show up, it's an Air Force guy? I mean, which one tends to give you the most resistance when you show up to one?
I would say it's probably the Army who shoot the mouth off the most.
Yeah.
The Marines, I think, are the funnest because usually there's alcohol involved and usually somebody's running around naked doing something stupid. You're like, how did you think this was a good idea tonight? Who dared you?
Yeah, who dared you to take off your clothes and put that on your head and run around the street? Yeah. Well, that's that guy. I would have, if I had to guess, And I know a lot of jarheads, I would have assumed, don't ever show up to a bunch of Marines at a barbecue. There's a problem. But the Army's the one who shoots off their mouth the most. Well, other than the pre-law college guys that shoot off their mouth, other than those guys, what's the most difficult? Okay, do you have to drag? I'm going to ask you this in kind of a generic way. Do you have to? Can you end up in a situation where you have to separate guys and drag them back to the base and turn them into either the brig or to an officer and go, look, we brought him back to the base, do something with him, put him in the barracks. Do you do that ever?
Yes, but so we don't have a brig, and we have holding cells at our department, but due to state requirements, we just temporarily hold you in for maybe 30 minutes, an hour, basically while we're finishing up your paperwork.
Just to process.
Just to process you until either we're going to take you to county jail, but the service members, we do take them back to their chain of commands. I've had other agencies around us, like Carmel PD was one of them, where they called and said, hey, we caught one of your guys' service members with a DOI. We're short-staffed. We don't have time to take him to county. Can we turn him over to you guys?
Well, see, that's what I was wondering if you just if there's a big ruckus and things finally calm down, if you put everybody in the proverbial paddy wagon and drive around and push off the 3 Navy guys and go, these guys belong to you. Here's your Navy guys. Drive over to the Army. Here's your 4 Army guys. Yeah, I mean, you're around. There's got to be some logistics about that. Do you ever find yourself returning sailors and going, look, we're not doing pressing charges. Just get this guy out of here.
So yes and no. It kind of depends on the situation. So in law enforcement, you have a lot of discretion, especially traffic stops.
Right.
I don't know, you ever been pulled over where you got a warning?
Yeah, sure.
That's discretion.
Right.
He could have gave you a ticket, but
decided, yeah.
Based on his interaction with you, decided, hey, education is going to be the better route today. And I don't think this person's going to do it again.
Yeah, but in bigger situations, when you guys are called out, and I hate saying this, but every time I ask you a question about being called out, I'm sorry. I picture an old Willys Jeep with 7 guys with white helmets and white armbands and billy clubs, running in to break up the bar fight. I know you're very clear on that's not what's happening, but I promise a lot of the listeners are feeling that way too when we talk about you going out there. So when I wasn't just kidding when I said the old paddy wagon, and I guarantee there's half the audience listening later is going, what's a paddy wagon? But the idea was that when you have discretion, do you ever find yourself returning, enlisted men going, just take to the gate, go to the gate of the Navy base and go, here's your guy, man, get it, sober him up and put him back where he's supposed to be. That ever happen?
Absolutely. All the way down to probably the most common one that I always seem to get stuck with is the service member who went out to the bar in downtown Monterey, walked back, and took a nap on the grass, and somebody found him.
Found him drunk and passed out.
Yeah, and I'm like, sure, I could charge you with drunk in public, but you weren't doing anything malicious. You weren't trying to break anything. Come on, let's go get in the car, and I'll go drop you.
And
off.
I think every guy in America has been woke up by sprinklers at one point.
Absolutely.
Going, what am I doing here? Not causing a problem. Well, that's good to know that there's a lot of times you can just go, come on, dude. I would hope you take him back to the guys at the gate and go, here's your guy.
And for me, in my experience, it's all about the intent. What did I catch you doing? Were you intentionally trying to break into this building, or did you just wrong place, wrong time when I saw you?
To sleep and get out of the rain.
Yeah. So if you weren't trying to do anything bad, then cool. I'll just take you back to your chain of command. Hey, you can sort it out with the sergeant in the morning. And I'm a firm believer in being that there's so many laws that we can enforce, especially in my mind, today's generation that you see in the military.
Right.
There's something way more productive about having that sergeant take him out to the tree line and PT them until they puke versus here's a $200 ticket. I'll see you in court.
No, I'm with you on that. I think that's I got to tell you, that's more old school thinking. Millennial Gen Z is, sign the ticket, see you in court. And, older generation stuff is, I'm going to work your ass until you remember this day.
Yep.
I think I'm with you on that. Has there ever been a time when you've had a call, and you may have to, if it's not often, you may have to really think, has there ever been a time when you rolled out on something with you and a partner and you immediately knew you had to call for backup?
Oh, yes.
Really?
Absolutely. And that's kind of something that it's a sense that you get over time.
Yeah.
The more traffic stops you do, you'll pull somebody over, and you just have just a weird feeling about it.
Really? Just
some.
The moment you're there, you just because of a combination of the car, the person, and the area you're in. Is it just a vibe?
It's a vibe, and the way it was always explained to me is this. And yes, in the grand scheme of things, we want to say, oh, the police don't profile. I think we criminally profile.
Well, I think you get a sense of what's going on. Is that really profiling? If you're all of a sudden afraid because you get a sense of something going on.
And well, the example that was given to me, you have 3 cars, identical.
Yeah.
The first car has an elderly couple in it. They drive up. They run a stop sign. Second car runs the same stop sign, but you can clearly see it's a mom, dad. You can see 2 kids in the back seat.
Right.
Third car comes up, and you see 4 males in it. You see people that have gang paraphernalia,
dark glasses.
And you're like, of these 3 cars, which one is probably up to something they're not supposed to?
I get that. Yeah, I don't think that's profiling as much. It is situational awareness of your surroundings.
Yes.
All right. So what did you have to do to call for backup? Well, give me something that happened where you immediately called for backup. Didn't say it went bad, but if it did, I want to know that story first.
So the one that I had, it actually ended up being a good one. I pulled a guy over for having window tint on his front driver window.
Right.
And just something about where I made the U-turn right behind him, turned on my lights. He had at least a half mile where there's bus lanes, plenty of room for him to pull over in a safe place. And he didn't pull over for about a good mile. All the way to the point where I'm starting to go, okay, are you not seeing me, or are you doing this on purpose?
Right.
What are you doing right now? So I instantly went ahead. It happened to be my watch commander at that time who came and responded. It just so happens this individual was I can't think of the word, where they don't believe in the Constitution of the United States. They're traveling on the road. They're not driving.
Right, not on a highway. When they set the Constitution aside, it goes to pre-constitutional rules of liberty.
Yes, and me and this guy, and I literally was just going to give him education because I don't really care if you have window tint. Most traffic stops are more about curiosity of who's in that car.
Right.
What are you doing?
Right.
All right, cool. You got window tint. Hey, you know it's illegal. That's all it was.
Yeah, go fix your tint.
And then after he started, because as law enforcement changes over time, it used to be you didn't tell people why you pulled them over. You would ask them, do you know why I pulled you over? And you're kind of hoping that they're going to admit to something that you didn't know.
Yeah.
But
the dead body in my trunk?
Yeah.
Is that why you pulled me over?
But no, it's you walk up, you introduce yourself, what department you're with, and you tell them, hey, I pulled you over for this.
Right.
And instantly the argument was on. That's unconstitutional. You can't do this. That's illegal. You're doing a false arrest. I'm like, okay, this is where this is go. I mean, that was the longest traffic stop.
But did the guy? You had to call for backup for that? Did the guy? Was it just to argue, or did you think the guy was going to turn on you?
So he was very aggressive, all the way down to he was throwing stuff in his car. But what really got me concerned is when I ran his driver's license, he came back on, and this was the first and only time I've ever heard it, on federal probation for cocaine.
Federal probation,
which I didn't know existed. And usually, like if you're on probation, it'll tell you what the crime was.
Yeah.
This just said cocaine. I was like,
yeah.
What?
Federal probation? That's a thing where you got caught flying a low-level airplane over the swamps of Louisiana and dropping bricks of cocaine to get picked up in pontoon boats, and you got caught.
He was involved into something. After a good 20 minutes of arguing with this guy, so in California there's a vehicle code, I think it's 23302, something like that, where if you refuse to sign that citation, then I'm to take you before a magistrate immediately, which he was fine with. But he also didn't realize that it was a Saturday afternoon.
There wasn't anybody in the shop till Monday.
Exactly. And I was like, and I pointed out to him, this is not at your convenience. It's when the judge is ready.
Yeah, when he's ready.
And finally, he ended up putting an N and an X on the ticket, which was good enough so I can get him on his way.
You ever been shot at?
I have not.
That's good.
And I'm very, very glad with that. Being that we're such a small agency, for the most part, we don't have a lot of violent crime. The worst thing we have is domestic violence.
Right.
Where we are at, we're very kind of a unique location, not just in our jurisdiction, how we operate, but we are the back road between Salinas, which tons of gang activity. Soledad State Prison's not that far away, so you got more gangs. We're kind of like this thoroughfare for all these back roads agencies.
Concentrate on those things too.
But we catch them a lot on our roadways, so we'll do traffic stops on them, and that leads to a lot of probation searches, different things.
Do you call the other agencies for backup on those and say, we got this guy here, he's kind of your? Do you ever call probation officers or parole officers and say, we got this guy on the side of the road in cuffs where, he gave us an issue, we're searching his car, come get him? You ever turn anybody over that way?
No, not so much that way. We will call different agencies for assistance from time to time, but it's more of like, hey, this is what I have. Have you guys had contact with him? Because there's a law enforcement program where you can put out messages, and there might be a contact message for this guy that says, hey, if he stopped, complete a field interview and contact officer so-and-so with this agency.
Right.
And it's because he might be suspected of another crime in another city or something like that.
Yeah.
But being that we're the Army, we have a lot more money, that our staffing is a lot higher. So like on any given shift, we have anywhere from 4 to 5 people working, even at nighttime. The city of Seaside, they might have 3 officers on for the entire night.
Wow.
In a much bigger city with a much bigger population.
You ever had an altercation with a woman where you had to fight a woman or wrestle a woman to the ground, and do you call a female officer and go, I don't want to get in trouble here. Come wrestle her to the ground because she's being a little contentious.
I know ever since I made lieutenant, I know we've had it, but I've never physically had to really wrestle a female. At least not that I can think of.
Because that's always a thing you think about in the news today, is that if you're law enforcement has to walk around in eggshells all the time now anyway, because of all the crap that's gone on in this country. A bunch of liberal people pushing the wrong fucking agenda. But the idea is that when you get to that situation, I would be scared to even approach a female. I'd call somebody and go, get a woman cop out here. I can't do this.
So a lot of times, yes, we're fortunate. We do have a couple female officers, and if you do need to do search, they'll come and help you. I'm not one to shy away from it. Not because I want to grope females or anything like that.
How did you get past the fear of being sued? Because they're just going to say something, man. What do you do then?
I'm always going to have a witness. I'm always going to do it on a camera. I'm always going to make sure I'm protected. That's
just
why.
Do your job.
Just do my job. I'm not there to cop a feel. I'm not.
It's just tough, man. It's a tough situation.
It is.
And you're trying to do your job, and you know that they're going to turn this around on you if they can. And
unfortunately, not all, but there's a lot of females that law enforcement contacts. You wouldn't want to cop a feel.
No,
they're homeless. They've had things as like, okay, let's get through this as fast as we can. It's not like we're out searching supermodels. And we're like, oh,
no. The woman comes up and says, I think that officer's going to rape me, and you look back and go, trust me, you're fine. You're in no danger. Well, so now so we go through the stuff and where you're at. You're born and raised, and you try to law enforcement, but you end up in the Coast Guard. Then you get into the Coast Guard's law enforcement. Now you're detached and you're out doing the civilian thing on a military base. You still are part of the Coast Guard. You mentioned to me when I first met you, we had lunch that day, that now you I don't know whether I guess I'll just pose it as a question. How much on the recruitment side are you helping with? Because you talked a little bit about advertising, a little bit about recruitment. You and I talked today. You brought some material, some things. That can't be part of your law enforcement duties?
No, it's not. So that's one of the really cool things about the reserves is we have a page we can go to, and the Coast Guard will solicit its needs to help active duty. And you get anything from people that want to break from their job, their college, or they just have kind of a dead end, meaningless job that's not really a career,
Yeah.
or the Coast Guard's going to pay more. So we can go into this website and that's actually what I ended up doing for. I just finished 6 months of orders at our Fresno recruiting office as the recruiting office assistant. When we did anything from different events, going to high schools, talking to kids, and it's something as the Coast Guard says everybody's a recruiter, which they finally made that true. Anybody that I bring in now that my orders have ended,
Yeah.
I can earn a letter of accommodation for it, which is very helpful because I now also get an advancement point. So when I'm sitting to make chief, those points can move me higher up on the list.
Yeah.
So it's very productive, but
you seem to like talking about it too.
it was so much fun to go out and talk to these kids and show them the different opportunities that are available to them. And because you don't know what everybody's needs are.
Right.
So some families, they might have that college fund set up to send their kids to a CSU and do whatever. Some parents might have served in the military where they've handed down that GI Bill.
Right.
There's a lot of families that they don't have the means to go to college, to get that higher education, to pursue that career they want, and that's where the military branches are great. I'm always going to say the Coast Guard's better than the other branches because I love our jobs.
Right. Well, it's your job to push back a little bit. You guys get a lot of crap from them, so it's your job to push back.
But I think the jobs the Coast Guard have are much more related to civilian jobs. All the way down to, so we have mechanics, where you're going to work on diesel engines. Not only going to teach you the basics at your A school, then we're going to send you to specialty schools put on by Honda and Yamaha to specifically work on that engine that they
Wow.
make for that boat.
Yeah.
So now you're going to know the ins and outs of that engine. You have damage controlmen. We're going to teach you how to weld. You're going to learn carpentry skills.
You guys have to have some, probably, I would guessing you'd have to have some fire control teams too that do some stuff where you learn the basics on that.
Well, and that's the part of the thing that makes us so unique is, so in the Coast Guard we have 20 or 21 different jobs you can do. But being that we're so small, those jobs become very broad.
Yeah.
The Army, if your job is to empty trash cans, you are going to be excellent at emptying trash cans because that's your job. Now, the Coast Guard, you might have to empty trash cans, wipe down the tables, and vacuum the office because there's just not enough of us to complete everything. But
Right.
that's where it's so cool. Is so like me as a maritime enforcement, yes, my primary function is law enforcement. When we go out and do a boarding, if I go through the certifications and I can become I'm basically a medic for my team. So I'll carry the medic bag, and if somebody slips, falls, my job will be to treat them, provide them with care, or if we find somebody injured on the boat.
Yeah.
And it could be anything from splinting a broken arm to
All kinds of
just
stuff happens on that. Yeah.
anything. So, yes, I'm there for law enforcement, but now all of a sudden I'm filling a medical role. That's what's so cool about, yes, you're always going to have your primary job, but if you want to get qualified and certified in different things, 100% you're going to.
So do you find the kids are responsive to this? Because I got to go back to the 80s when I was in high school and, arrogant and stupid. But if a guy like you to come in to talk about the Coast Guard, I don't think I would have even listened. And, this is because I'm young and stupid, of course, but do you find kids are responsive to what you're saying?
I think once we actually get to sit down at a table and talk to them, they're very responsive. It's getting that engagement because most people, we still run into people who go, the Coast Guard, what's that? They've never heard of the Coast Guard.
Really?
And I'm like, okay, I get it. We're small, but maybe expand out of your bubble a little bit.
I got a movie you can carry in DVD if you want to show them all about the Coast Guard. Ashton Kutcher would give us copies for free if you.
I'm sure he would.
If you need to, let them know what the Coast Guard's all about.
But the way the Coast Guard, I think what makes us better and where a lot of our people succeed is it's the jobs that we do because majority of our stuff ties back into the civilian world.
Yeah.
Like the staff sergeant you were talking about. Yes, he's a pilot or a mechanic on helicopters. Some of those skills coming back in the civilian sector are going to transfer over very well. not all of them will.
Not as much when you're
Not as
specialized
much
like
when you
that,
specialize
though.
like
No,
that.
you know.
Like in my brother-in-law as an example, he was a mechanic in the Army. Worked on forklifts, Humvees, all kinds of stuff. It took him the better part of 10 years of being a diesel mechanic at different shops before he got the qualifications he needed and the skills to be able to get to the shops that he wanted to work at, like Caterpillar
Sure.
and John Deere.
Yeah.
And I think that's where the Coast Guard does such a better job at bridging that gap. Is most of the schools we go to are civilian certified, or you have civilian instructors.
It sounds like when you go talk to these kids, it doesn't sound, maybe this is true for all the platforms, but it sounds like you're better sitting at a lunch table with 5 or 6 of them than you'd be at a podium in an auditorium.
It absolutely is.
Yeah.
But it's challenging in itself too, because some schools have different rules because other recruiters have ruined it for others.
Sure.
All the way to where we've been to schools where they've straight up told us we will not let the Navy in here because of something that one of the recruiters did or said to a student.
Wow.
Parents found out, complaints were filed. So it is very challenging. So you're constantly always building that network with the schools and the people that you work
you're
with.
building your own reputation.
Mm-hmm.
I bet the first words out of your mouth in that situation was, "We're not part of the Navy."
Yeah.
Let's be clear on that.
But it just depends, and it's hard. So like the Fresno office, our area of responsibility was 12 counties. So we cover from Bakersfield pretty much all the way to Modesto and all the way to the coast.
Why on earth would you have a Coast Guard office in Fresno?
'Cause
The
it's-
nearest ocean's 300 miles away, man.
It's the biggest city in the Central Valley, or at least population wise.
So what? There's no ocean. We don't need you guys there, man. There's no Coast Guard need.
So good secret here. So Bakersfield,
Yeah.
it is a honeypot for the Coast Guard.
You're kidding.
It is for the Fresno office, it is one of our number one places to recruit where we find people that want to join.
If that's true, I want to tell you why. Because when you sit down with these kids and your brochures of these boats in the ocean, they're going to say, "What's the big blue body of water?" And you're going to say, "That's called the Pacific Ocean," and you've never seen it before.
Yep.
That's how you're getting them. You're getting kids who've never seen the ocean.
And
That's funny. You guys don't do anything in lakes, do you?
yes, we do.
You do. Come on. Now, whoa. Okay, not the Great Lakes. I would see the Great Lakes, but you don't do anything in lakes, right?
Tahoe.
You do. Seriously?
And I think Lake Havasu. So any lake that crosses state lines becomes federal jurisdiction.
No. I did not know that.
Now, we don't do a lot in Tahoe. Tahoe's probably set up more so for search and rescue.
Yeah, I could see
because
that.
all the sheriff's departments there also have their dive teams, their boat units.
Yeah.
So you have 5 agencies there on the lake.
But still, I didn't know that's a thing, that if the lake crosses a border.
Mm-hmm.
Now I'm racing in my head. There's not too many, but yeah, you're right. Tahoe's one.
Tahoe, the Mississippi River, Missouri River. We have buoy tenders up on there that help make sure that
You
the
navigate
boats.
on those? Are you kidding me? What?
So that's one of the Coast Guard's primary missions is aids to navigation.
Yeah.
We make sure all the buoys are lit up correctly, that they're in the correct location so that those boats can make it through the right channels without
Yeah.
running aground. They don't hit bridges, all that good stuff.
Seriously, I had no idea that was a thing. Far out, man. Well, I don't know how I can help you. We've done this. I got to tell you, this has been one of the best interviews I've done. I can't believe it's been an hour and 7 minutes and it went by so fast. And you got so much experience and knowledge and it flowed right. We could probably sit here another hour. But I'm telling you that it's fascinating. Some of the stuff I learned from you today. Absolutely enthralling.
I would say when I came to this interview, the one thing that I really wanted to leave the listeners with is if you have kids that are about to graduate high school or in their junior year, make sure they give themselves as many opportunities as available. Apply for the colleges. Look at the junior colleges, the trade schools. Find out if you're eligible for military enlistment. And don't just stop at one branch because dad or grandpa was in the Army. Go talk to them all and then look at which one's going to help you succeed in the career that you want.
I would agree.
If you're super smart and you want to work with nuclear stuff, that's the Navy all day long.
Yeah.
But if you want to do life-saving and do anything kind of like first responder, the Coast Guard might be a great asset for you. As the Marines, they have certain jobs that are going to be what you want.
Well, I'll tell you what, Calder Keene, I am so thankful you took the time to drive down here. I mean, we talked about it months ago, but I'm so glad. I wasn't sure how this was going to go, and I'm completely impressed with you and everything you've done and the stuff you're still doing and the things you got to put up with. And I think that right now, I'll probably remember more as the time goes on. But when you said that you got to roll up to a call and you have to assess a situation and think of several books of laws that have to apply by who you're engaging with, what property you're standing on. It's tough enough to just be a cop, let alone you got to be a law student in your head and try to sort this stuff out. I couldn't do it. That's a young man's game. It's not mine. I really appreciate you coming in. Thank you so much.
Glad to be here finally.
Hey, you guys, listen, I'm going to sign off and get out of here. That's one of the best interviews we've ever done. I'm going to have to find a way to promote that where everybody gets to listen, because each one of you guys knows somebody that needs to hear this. You guys all know somebody that needs to listen to this message, because there was a lot of stuff in here. There was more information in this one probably than anything we've done so far. Listen, I got to get out of here. My time is up. And my wife's going to come banging on the studio door, demanding that I start my chores and my honey-do list, and so I don't want to mess that up. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you guys for listening. Not sure what part of the world you're tuning in from. Maybe you're listening AM, FM, Sirius XM, or perhaps on the Armed Service Radio Network. Remember two things: wherever you go, there you are, and I'll catch you guys on the flip side.